Francoist Spain. Other terms also include Fascist Spain. The nature of the regime evolved and changed during its existence. Months after the start of the Spanish Civil War in July 1936, Franco emerged as the dominant rebel military leader and was proclaimed head of state on 1 April 1939, ruling a dictatorship over the territory controlled by the nationalist faction. The 1937 Unification Decree, which merged all parties supporting the rebel side, led to nationalist Spain becoming a single-party regime under the Fety de las Jones. The end of the war in 1939 brought the extension of the Franco rule to the whole country and the exile of republican institutions. The Francoist dictatorship originally took a form described as fascistized dictatorship, or semi-fascist regime, showing clear influence of fascism in fields such as labor relations, the autarkic economic policy, aesthetics, and the single-party system. As time went on, the regime opened up and became closer to developmental dictatorships, although it always preserved residual fascist trappings. During the Second World War, Spain did not join the Axis powers. Nevertheless, Spain supported them in various ways throughout most of the war while maintaining its neutrality. Because of this, Spain was isolated by many other countries for nearly a decade after World War II. While its autarkic economy, still trying to recover from the Civil War, suffered from chronic depression, the 1947 Law of Succession made Spain a de jure kingdom again, but defined Franco as the head of state for life with the power to choose the person to become king of Spain and his successor. Reforms were implemented in the 1950s and Spain abandoned autarky, reassigned authority from the Falangist movement, which had been prone to isolationism, to a new breed of economists, the technocrats of Opus Dei. This led to massive economic growth, second only to Japan, that lasted until the mid-1970s, known as the Spanish Miracle. During the 1950s, the regime also changed from being openly totalitarian and using severe repression to an authoritarian system with limited pluralism. As a result of these reforms, Spain was allowed to join the United Nations in 1955, and during the Cold War Franco was one of Europe's foremost anti-communist figures. His regime was assisted by the Western powers, particularly the United States. Franco died in 1975 at the age of 82. He restored the monarchy before his death and made his successor King Juan Carlos I, who would lead the Spanish transition to democracy. On 1 October 1933, Franco was formally recognized as Caudillo of Spain, the Spanish equivalent of the Italian Duce and the German Führer, by the Junta de Defensa Nacional, which governed the territories occupied by the nationalists. In April 1937, Franco assumed control of the Falange Española de las Jones, then led by Manuel Hedera, who had succeeded José Antonio Primo de Rivera, who was executed in November 1936 by the Republican government. He merged it with the Carlist Comunión Tradicionalista to form the Falange Española Tradicionalista de las Jones, the sole legal party of Francoist Spain. It was the main component of the Movimiento Nacional. The Falangists were concentrated at local government and grassroots level, entrusted with harnessing the Civil War's momentum of mass mobilization through their auxiliaries and trade unions by collecting denunciations of enemy residents and recruiting workers into the trade unions. While there were prominent Falangists at a senior government level, especially before the late 1940s, there were higher concentrations of monarchists, military officials and other traditional conservative factions at those levels. However, the Falange remained the sole party. The Francoists took control of Spain through a comprehensive and methodical war of attrition which involved the imprisonment and executions of Spaniards found guilty of supporting the values promoted by the Republic: regional autonomy, liberal or social democracy, free elections and women's rights, including the vote. The right wing considered these enemy elements to comprise an anti-Spain that was the product of Bolsheviks and a Judeo-Masonic conspiracy. The latter allegation predated Falangism, having evolved after the reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula from the Islamic Moors. The reconquista had formally ended with the Alhambra Decree of 1492, which ordered the expulsion of Jews from Spain. At the end of the Spanish Civil War, according to the regime's own figures, there were more than 270,000 men and women held in prisons, and some 500,000 had fled into exile. Large numbers of those captured were returned to Spain or interned in Nazi concentration camps as stateless enemies. Between 6,000 and 7,000 exiles from Spain died in Mauthausen. It has been estimated that more than 200,000 Spaniards died in the first years of the dictatorship, from 1940 to 1942, as a result of political persecution. Who